We've come a long way. We've learned about objects and now we're starting to get more and more advanced, and you're going to have to understand arrays when you come to programming. And I like to think of an array as a variable that stores multiple values. And I want to stress the word multiple values. We're going to see shortly what I mean by multiple values. But before we do, how do we identify an array? An object can always be identified by the curly brackets. Arrays are closely related to it, and you can identify an array with square brackets. And taking a step back, remember when we were discussing data types in JavaScript, there are two data types. There's primitive, which is just a fancy word for simple. Things like strings, numbers, booleans, null, undefined, and even a symbol. Those are all simple data types. But then we've also got the object, which is complex data types. Although everything in JavaScript is pretty much an object, for our sakes, it's always nice to break it down and go, okay, cool, we've got objects that we know. We've also got arrays, and we've also got another one, functions. And those are the second type of data types in JavaScript. Okay, so putting that aside, you kind of know where arrays fit in. It's a data type of JavaScript, but they are just a special kind of object. And I'll prove this to you. Let's have a look. An array is just an object. And remember how we said to identify an array or to create an array, you have to have square brackets. Objects are curly brackets. So let's define an array. Let A equal open and close square brackets. That's it. We've created an array. And to show you that this array is actually an object, we can just go type of A. There you go. It's an object. And remember I said an array is like a variable that can store multiple values. Well, how do we work with chunks of data? For example, let's take a very easy scenario. Let's say we've got the numbers 1, 3, 5, and 7. How do we store that? Can we just store it as a string? Well, I guess we can. We can just write it out 1, 3, 5, 7. That's just awkward. What about if we wanted to add the numbers together? What about if we wanted to extract just the 5 and leave the 1, 3, and 7? We can't really do that with strings, can we? It's awkward. Like, it's very difficult. Let me just show you now a quick example of working with numbers in an array. So how do we store numbers, and what's the best way? Because strings are awkward. So let's define an array and let's call it numbers, for lack of a better word. And our numbers are 1, 3, 5, and 7. Now we've created an array called numbers. That's it. That's how easy it is. And if we console log out numbers and we open it up, you can already see the console is telling us that there are 4 elements in this array. We can open it up and look at that. There's a few things worth noting here. One is this array has a magical length property. Where did that come from? We're going to see shortly, don't worry. The second thing worth noting is that the key value pairs here, those keys, it starts at the number 0. Why is that? Well, you got to think about the word numbers that we've created there as a reference to a memory location. And if we type numbers 0, all that that's trying to do is it's referencing a location in memory that is X elements away from the reference point. Here we've said the reference point is 0. So it's taking the very first element it finds in memory. So in this way, the index, those numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3, those are used as an offset. And in our example, the very first element in the array, the number 1, or the key of 0, it's X elements away from its reference point, which is why when we type numbers 0, it should give us 1, because we are literally pointing to the same memory location that is stored in. Hope it's making sense, but we're going to see a lot more examples of this later. Let's move on. So we've just seen arrays are data structures that take in multiple values. Arrays don't have key value pairs, they have singular pieces of data. But what's cool is that arrays are objects, so they can contain objects as well. And we've seen arrays are a special kind of object, but one difference is that arrays have a magical length property. The first value in the array is stored under the key 0. And remember when we looked at the JavaScript object model, where the ECMAScript spec defines an object as just a reference, just a dictionary, where you've got the keys, and those keys point to a property attribute. Well, it's the same with arrays. Let me show you an example. So let's look at the array model. How does the engine treat an array? Where does this length property come from? Well, let's define an array that just holds one value, and that value is the letter A. So we've got an array. The array is called letters. It's got two properties, a length and it's got a key, and the key starts at 0. And they point to property attributes. The length property has a value of 1, but its enumerable and configurable properties are set to false because this is inbuilt in JavaScript. We don't want to be messing this around and reconfiguring it. The key of 0 points to the value A, and that all has the default true values. Let's take our array and let's push B into it. What happens then? Well, now you're going to have an extra key. You're going to have a 1. That 1 will point to a value B. And the length and the key of 0 point to exactly the same things as before. I hope this is starting to become more intuitive to you. Don't worry too much. I know this is a bit theoretical because this is what the engine and this is what the arrays and objects are doing in the background. A lot of people don't understand this, but it is going to help you. So let's move on. Let me show you some more examples.